Appalachia, a word that evokes a whole passel of reactions. Everything from the beauty of a mountain top to trailer parks, drugs, and about everything in between. The Appalachian Mountains are indeed the oldest mountains in the world. They once towered 30,000 feet into the air. They stretch from eastern Canada through 14 states all the way to Louisiana. The folks who live in these mountains have faced an unending number of tragic and just plain odd happenings that cry out for the telling. Hello, I'm Larry Bentley, and I was born and raised in these very mountains by family who themselves were born and raised and lived for generations in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. Come with me, and we'll take a look at some of the unending stories that come from within my beloved mountains, and we'll take a look at some through the eyes of an Appalachian that are outside the area as well. Welcome to Season 5 of Appalachian Murder, Mystery, and Legend. Howdy, my good friends. I hope you're doing well today. Thank you so much for stopping by. There's a county in Virginia called Lunenburg. It was a huge county to start with and was referred to as the Old Free State. I imagine y'all wondered how on earth I knew that. And I bet you wondered why on earth I'd even want to know that. Well, I happened to be looking up my family roots when I found that my great-great-great-grandfather, William Frank Bentley, was born in Lunenburg back in 1844. That would be how I started looking into the place and how I learned a few things about it. For example, I learned that there was a horrible axe murder of a lady named Lucy Jane Pollard that happened right outside in broad daylight, just outside her back door on June 14th, 1895, just before my grandpa Frank's 51st birthday, that is. Within 4 days, the local constable had arrested 4 suspects, 3 women and 1 man. And as with all serious crimes across the South back in the day, they were all black, while the victim was of the Caucasian persuasion. Remember, we're dealing with the boss system of government here, and we're just a few miles outside of what was once the capital of the Confederacy. So, by July 20th, the whole thing had been wrapped up, nice little bow on the top of it, and 4 of the poor folks on trial for murder. And as business as usual across the South after the Civil War, they were to be sentenced to death, dragged out to a gallows, and strung up for the town, right in the town square for all the citizens to walk by and look at. Now, but times, folks, by this time in 1895, times was a changing. This time it was blatantly obvious that somebody had made it all up. This wasn't going to be another round up some black folks and blame it on them and be done with it, at least not without some kind of a fight or backlash, because enough was enough. So come on in, take your shoes off, and set a spell, and let me tell you what happened in Lunenburg County in Virginia back in 1895. Now, the man you see here, if you happen to be watching on Rumble, YouTube, or on the Spotify video, is called Edward Pollard. That's his name. He married Lucy Jane Folks in 1882 when he was 60 years old and she was 44. He had been married 2 times before. Each time he done what we call in the mountains to married up. And most of the marriages, when they ended, which was with the end of the life of the wives of each one of them, at the end of that, he actually ended up a little bit better off financially. And by the time his second wife died, Edward was a successful tobacco farmer and with a pretty nice portfolio of land holdings. But he didn't see any reason to change what worked so well in the past. And well, with that, he married Lucy Jane Folks, who was another plantation family. And that jerked old Ed up another few young rungs on the social ladder. Now, by 1895, Ed was 73 years old and had become what most folks knew to be a, asshole in general, put it mildly. He was constantly raising Cain with his neighbor over property boundaries and right-of-ways. He'd come to be a money lender because he had enough to do it, and with that, what was known to be as compound daily interest to go with it, he could fleece people all the way to the bank and back. With that came the general knowledge by nearly everybody in an about 100-mile radius of the Pollards that he had, a right smart bit of cash tucked away in the house with it. Now, here's a picture of Lucy. Uh, then, on the evening of June 14th, 1895, when Ed comes in from the field, probably thinking about how good supper was going to be, and he finds Lucy laying out in the backyard, about halfway between the house and the chicken coop, which is only a few steps out the back door. Now, Ed had been working in the field pretty close by, I'd guess because 73 years old in 1895 may have been a bit rougher on a fella than 73 years old nowadays, especially if that feller spent his life working at the tobacco field. Now, those of you who hadn't had the pleasure to know what I mean by that, if you ain't never done it, went out and hit the tobacco fields, all I can say is that, there just ain't a whole lot easy about it. So I'm saying that it's probably impressive that Ed was able to walk erect, let alone go out in the nearby field and work a little bit at 73 years old. Anyway, Lucy was laying on her back with her feet pointed toward the house and her head toward the chicken coop. Now, she had been hacked in the head with her meat hatchet, which she kept out back for dispatching the poultry. Sounds to me like it she might have been headed out there, to the coop to maybe grab a supper chicken. To make him some chicken that he's been thinking about all day. But so Ed, once he sees Lucy laying there like that, he flies into Ed Pollard to the rescue mode, runs in the house and does what any good old-timey miser does, and checks to see, if there's any money missing or maybe somebody still in the house trying to rob him blind in the process of taking his money. You've got to take care of the important stuff first. After all, at this point, Lucy's either going to make it or she ain't, but the money, it can't be replaced. Odd how the miser mind works, ain't it? But the first thought ain't, why is my wife all laying out here hacked to death, but, between the house and chicken coop, or maybe who did it, but where's the money? But, by the way, when I say hacked, I don't mean somebody stole her email. Like I said, she was killed with a meat hatchet and killed so brutally that her eyes were left open and staring straight up. And that was the part that bothered folks who showed up. Most folks don't know that that happens quite often when somebody meets a sudden death. At least that would be what I've seen firsthand in my days in the rescue squad. It was obvious that there was quite a struggle because she had multiple wounds to her front, back, both arms, chest, neck, and head, along with several places on the ground where she'd been bleeding. That meant that she had been attacked or fought to another location and then fought even more to another location, but probably just trying to get back in the house. Anyway, after Ed checks on his money, he runs out the front to ring the big farm bell. And that wouldn't be a surprise to any of us Appalachians that are listening here today, because we all know that the bells that you see out in the front yard of them old farmhouses were more than just a decoration. They were there for a reason. It was the bell was rung to call when food was ready at the end of the workday, maybe, or if there was something very wrong and somebody needs to help PDQ. You'd have to know what time of day it was and how the bell was being rung to be able to figure out which one it was. Apparently, Ed was ringing it like the house was on fire because people in the area come a running, and I mean a bunch of them showed up. Back then in Lunenburg, despite the fact that there was a former Confederate colonel sitting in the governor's office trying to keep the Confederacy alive through the boss system of government, black folks and white folks were living together and well integrated in the area, and they took good care of each other. Now, when all the folks got there, they found Ed stretched out and hunched over Lucy crying. Now, the folks who saw it said that, he was gray-eyed stricken. Now, I'm not sure how many of you have ever heard of that one. That's an oldie and a goldie. Now, where I come from, if you're gray-eyed stricken, that means you're stricken with the love bug, and I mean you struck deep. But most folks there thought that it must have been because he stayed there beside his wife's body, all blame night long. Had to be true. Now, there were a few that showed up who'd had business dealings with Ed, and once they found out that some money was missing, they thought that, he was probably crying over the missing money and the cost of maybe burying his wife on top of it more than he is gray-eyed stricken about anybody. Now, for some reason, Ed kept asking for somebody to run and fetch Martha Thompson, who was a neighbor. Martha couldn't come, but she sent her son Billy Petrus over. Now, He's just another one of the many folks that showed up there. Yes, folks, you heard me right. There was $800 missing. That's just over $30,000 in today's money. $70 worth of gold and a $100 bond certificate on top of that. That's worth about another $25,000 in today's money. Lucy had some missing jewelry too, and there was something odd about how the money was taken. Now, Ed was he hid the money, and whoever it was that took it, just walked right in and went straight to the hidey hole, which happened to be the liquor cabinet, and lifted the cash. In fact, they hadn't even had to search for anything. They walked right to where everything was and just took it. They'd helped themselves to a whole load of Lucy's dresses too, and before they left, they took the bedclothes off the bed too, kind of like the Grinch, except it wasn't Christmas. Now, folks noticed that too, that outside between the chicken coop and the house, there was several broken eggs laying around on the ground, which means that Lucy was probably wasn't going to fetch a dinner chicken after all. She was probably just going to grab a few eggs, and which she managed to get before somebody started pecking her apart with the meat hatchet, which was also found laying near her too. Now, with all that being said, it makes me wonder about the relationship between the two lovebirds, Ed and Lucy. That's the first thing popped into my mind anyway. From what I found, well, it looks like Ed was a pretty good husband. Might have been an a-hole to everybody else, but seemed to be all right with him and Lucy, at least as far as anybody around him could see. That's what I read. It was his neighbors that caught his wrath if he thought somebody might have been trying to fudge a fence line a quarter inch or so. Now, he and Lucy supposedly got along just fine. Of course, they should have, because they had a good bit of practice at it, what with being married before, and you might say that they found each other, kind of a little later in life than most people get married, so they ought to be getting along all right. Lucy would be the third wife to kiss the baby while married to Ed, and I know in today's world, first woman to pass or wife to pass would be looked at real hard. Now, the second would be a problem. The third would be a reason to take a good look at the first two along with that one, because something just ain't right. Now, somebody would be so far up Ed's hindquarters that he could wink at him every time he brushed his teeth, I'd say. But being back in 1895, it wasn't uncommon for folks to just be walking around and drop over from some kind of sickness like maybe typhoid or hepatitis or tuberculosis, among other stuff. But I don't know about Lucy here. I don't think maybe she caught anything off the meat hatchet other than right smart hacking, which makes me think that it's probably just outright murder. I don't believe there's any disease that's instantaneous like it. But that, of course, meant that the local constables were going to have to come around and take a look at what happened. Now, I don't know how many folks know just what a constable is. To make it simple, he would be like a sheriff, investigator, justice of the peace, court bailiff, and a few other things all rolled into one. That might very well just be a little bit different in different states, but in Virginia, that just about covered it. If there was authority to be had in Virginia in 1895, you can just about bet a constable would have it. Like we already covered, black and white folks lived together there in Lunenburg. So black and white folks both showed up to see what was going on at the Pollard place and try to help. Now, among those folks were a 47-year-old lady shown on the right there named Mary Abernathy, 23-year-old Pokey Barnes, along with her mother Mary Barnes, and that would be Mary there. Now, all three were black ladies who were there to help. Now, there's a reason that I point out these ladies, as well as mention the color of their skin. Sure ain't because it mattered to me what color somebody is, but back in 1895 in Virginia, as a whole, the state government was ran mostly by the Southern aristocrats who still hadn't understood that they took an ass whipping 30 years earlier. But there was pockets of people living across the state that sure did, and they were getting tired of it. Just a side fact here, it was the beginning of what would take about another 75 years and rewriting of the state constitution to finally undo their damage and weed them out of the state government without violence. And the boss system is hard to break up, folks, without violence. With the boss system came the racism, and you'll see here what I mean by saying all this shortly. All three of the ladies had worked at the Pollard farm Mary Abernathy had actually been into Pollard's house earlier that day the day of Lucy's murder, and was likely the last person to even see Lucy alive. Now, definitely not a position you want to be in if you happen to be black in Virginia in 1895. Now, Mary had done some work around the house and then left, saying goodbye to Lucy, who was just fine when she left. Pokey Barnes had been working near the Pollard place that day, and then Mary, her mother, had been working at the Pollard house in the garden that day. Now, I know it's a plantation. Why would you have a garden? Well, big farmers like to use every bit of their land for their cash crop, so in order to grow their food, they had to put a garden in their yard closer to the house. About all you had to do was keep the weeds out, and you were good to go. And there are folks, around nowadays that have this school of thought that weeds are actually beneficial to a garden. Now, I wish one of them fellers would have probably stopped by and told my granddaddy about that. It was my job to play hand to mouth with the rat snakes to get the weeds out of the cucumber patch. Now, good thing for them things ain't as dangerous as they think they are. Or for some reason, they love hiding in cucumbers, squash, and melons, and they like the weeds where they are, thank you very much, and they will bite you to prove it. But anyway, these three ladies had all but been working and near the farm the day Lucy was murdered, and might I add, just like they did every day. Now, Herbert Thompson was another man that came a running when he heard the bell. His mother, Martha, was a very good friend of the Pollards, and she was actually related to Lucy through a previous marriage. Now, that would be the reason that Ed was asking for Martha when she sent her son Billy Petrus over in her place. And once the constables got there, along with everything else that we've talked about so far, they found two sets of shoe prints that started at the Pollard Spring, headed toward the house, and stopped about 75 yards from where Lucy was killed. Yes, I hear you. How they determined that the footprints could have had anything to do with Lucy's murder, and how they could do that was beyond me, too, let alone the fact that half the county had already trundled all over the crime scene, but apparently that's what they found. They say they did. Early the next morning, about 20 miles or so from the Pollard house, there was a feller looking to buy himself a cheap breakfast. Now, he was a black man named Solomon Marable. Up until right now in the story, you're probably thinking, man, I didn't realize black and white folks lived together as neighbors in the Piedmont area of Virginia back in 1895 and watched out for each other like they did. It happened all day long in the mountains, by the way. But don't get used to thinking that it was going to be done in peace, because the racism Jew's about to drop. When there's a former Confederate in control of the government, it ain't ever far away. When Mr. Marable paid for his breakfast, he paid with a $20 bill. That got folks' attention because $20 back then was like $760 in today's money, or about like $1,000 bill would be. Now, he was using that 20 spot to pay for his cheap breakfast. At first, it was just thought to be odd that Mr. Marable looked like a transient just passing through, who surprised folks by paying with his $20 bill, which very few people had back then, and that was until the investigators heard about it. They wondered the same thing, but they had to add their opinion to it, that there's just no way a black man ought to have a $20 bill unless he stole it. And it was just so happened that Ed Pollard's missing $800 was in $20 bills. It didn't help that Mr. Marable was, in fact, he had been tried and acquitted for a murder of a young girl 2 years earlier in North Carolina. Him being acquitted was nothing but a shy of a miracle, because former Confederates were in control there too, which means that the investigators in North Carolina were very well could have done what Confederate aristocrats did in the majority of the time, which was to go grab the nearest black person that they could find and blame everything on them when it wasn't blatantly obvious who was actually had actually done it, and heck, sometimes even when it was. Of course, none of that mattered to the constable. What mattered was that he'd been tried for murder, which to a racist mind meant that he got by with it. Now, that led to the attitude that Mr. Marable ain't about to get by with it again, especially on their watch. Now, Mr. Marable wasn't the only person that they were looking at. Some thought that there was no way that a man could have took as many whacks to kill Lucy as um, was used on her by the unsub, and so that meant that it probably had to be a woman. Not to mention that a man probably wouldn't need to go after any dresses either. Now, of course, that meant that they were looking real hard at Mary Abernathy, Mary Barnes, and her daughter Pokey Barnes. Now, that theory might have had a little bit of merit to it, because if it was a woman that did it, that meant that Lucy was more of an equal match for the perpetrator, and there was probably a bigger struggle, which appears to be the actual case here. But what indicated that the female perp was black? I would want to know exactly why Martha Thompson couldn't make it over to the Pollard's house on the day of the murder, too. Of course, it could be nothing at all, but I just say that because that's where I'd go look next. So much for what I say. 4 days into the investigation, they pounced on and arrested Mary Abernathy, Mary Barnes, and her daughter Pokey. Around the same time they were doing that, the constable was bringing Mr. Marable in for some questioning, and he didn't do too good with the answer. Now, it all started when he couldn't tell them where he'd got the $20 bill. Everything went downhill from there. Now, we all know that the methods of interrogation back when then were, they pretty much beat the story you want out of whoever you want, however you want. So, after meeting behind closed doors for a spell, Mr. Marable suddenly remembered that he saw both Mary's and Pokey the day that Lucy was murdered, and they told him that they were going to go do something. They had something in store to get some money. Now, when they questioned the women, they said that they don't even know a Solomon Marable, don't know who he is. Now, that's okay, though, because Mr. Marable keeps talking, and he says that, he can't say he knows them either. He just ran across them in passing, and they, out of the wild blue yonder, said, "Hey, mister, we're fixing to go hit a lick and make some money." But then he saw them, the ladies that he really didn't know later on the same night with their hands and clothing covered in blood. Heck, I reckon they must have been carrying a load of dresses and the bedclothes around with them, too, for all I could tell. But that's when one of the women walked over and laid a $20 on him, about $20 spot on him for absolutely no reason at all. I can say that in my lifetime, I can tell you exactly how many times somebody stepped out of nowhere and slid me a $1,000 bill for absolutely nothing. And I bet you folks can too. My score is 0. But investigators in Lunenburg, the old free state of the Commonwealth of Virginia in 1895, couldn't find anything at all that tied the ladies to Mr. Marable. So they decided to put him on trial right along with him despite it all. Completely opposite of what would happen today. And they were going to be tried without attorneys to represent them, which, after everything else that's happened, ain't surprising at all to me, knowing who's running the show, and that would be the Governor O'Farrell there you see in the picture. One thing that they wasn't counting on was Pokey Barnes, being 23 years old, had a right smart bit of knowledge, legal knowledge, and she managed to establish her alibi by bringing in all the folks who testified that she was with him. And it was looking pretty good for her, for the good bit of the trial. One thing you have to master when you're a Confederate racist working on prosecution of black folks with your only evidence being a witness that just so happens to be one of the defendants that you're calling a liar and trying to send to the gallows is called the liar's straddle, folks. That's what they call it. So the prosecutor had to refute Pokey's alibis by having Mr. Marable testify that she was there, even though he's lying about everything else he says. That's or then they start bringing up the incidents, incidents that happened between the women and Lucy Pollard. It sounds like Pokey had some kind of a run-in with Lucy. That happened in the August before. Lucy had, before Lucy got hacked. She told Pokey that she didn't want her coming back into her property because she thought Pokey was stealing her vegetables out of her garden. So Pokey left. But a few days after later, somebody saw her on walking the road, and she said that if she ever saw Lucy Pollard in the road, she was going to shoot her. Of course, that was 10 months before Lucy was murdered. And aside from the fact that Lucy wasn't shot, besides, folks say a whole lot of stuff when they're mad and that they don't intend or intend to even try to do. But another tactic that the prosecutor did was try the ladies separate in trials and had Mr. Marable testify at each one. That led to Mr. Marable having some kind of a big problem when it came to keeping his story straight for each trial. Of course, he changed it to fit every trial. Mary Abernathy's trial, he said that the women actually told him a week in advance that they were going to kill Lucy. Then during Pokey's trial, he said that he actually held down Lucy while the women murdered her, which put him at the scene of the crime. Apparently, the man was told to do whatever it took to get the women convicted, and they'll see to it that he goes home. It must have been when he put himself at the scene like that, taking part in the murder, that he realized that he might have just jumped the shark with his story, because all of a sudden he said that he actually the women had nothing to do with the murder, and he said that he would take partial responsibility for it, but it wasn't the women that did it. It was a white man who made him do it, and he actually stayed consistent with this story this time. To me, if there's a version of Mr. Marable's story to be believed, I'd say that's probably the one. Now, this is what Mr. Marable said actually happened, really, and he testified to it right there in the trial. He said that this white man stopped me while I was on my way to the sawmill near Fort Mitchell, and he held a pistol to my face, threatening to kill me if I didn't go with him. He asked me if I knew anybody that in that part of the county or country, and I said specifically Mr. Pollard, or he said specifically Mr. Pollard, and I told him that I didn't hardly know nobody at all. He said, or then he told me that to come with him, and he had a grudge against Mr. Pollard, and that he was planning to kill Mr. or Mrs. Pollard, or both of them. And Mr. Marable said that he was scared, so he followed the man like he was told. He said that they got to the Pollard Spring and turned toward the farm once they got to the spring. Historians say that that fact that he said that adds a lot to his story, because investigators never released the fact that they'd found tracks there around the spring. Then once outside the Pollard's house, he said that the white man confronted Mrs. Pollard right outside the door, and he told Mr. Marable to hold her while he goes out and gets the axe or meat hatchet and returns. And Mr. Marable said that he held Lucy while the man took the hatchet and hacked her to death. After Lucy was dead, the white man forced him to go in the house, and the man found the key, unlocked some kind of container box, which was the liquor cabinet, by the way. And I've never been inside it, he said. The man grabbed the money, handed Mr. Marable two $20 bills, and threatened his life if he ever opened his mouth about what happened. And then the white man said, "Here are the names of 3 people to blame it on if you ever get caught." So once the new version of the Mr. White Man making him do all that came to the press, black and white folks across Virginia say, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life, and none of the women should have ever been charged, let alone be on trial for their lives. Then the newspapers jumped in and laid the entire Lunenburg government to the bone over it. And of course, it didn't matter. Southern aristocrat gonna do what a Southern aristocrat gonna do, and saying they're wrong about something don't come easy, if ever. So the aristocrat citizens appalled that anybody, or they were all appalled that anybody would ever think that the Lunenburg court was anything but honorable. So they still continued right along with the women on trial. Now, 2 of the women, Mary Abernathy and Pokey Barnes, were acquitted. Now, Mary Barnes got sentenced to prison, which is a far cry from what normally happens in cases like this. So despite not admitting anything, they sure must have heard the people speak, because they certainly turned on a dime when it came to sentencing her. Then the very governor, who was a colonel in the Confederate Army, pardoned Mary, which was never done. I reckon they knew civil unrest when they saw it, and they saw plenty of it, because people were upset all over Lunenburg because of this. Solomon Marable, well, he was put on trial for his trouble and eventually sentenced to be hung. They did get Mr. Marable to attempt to identify the white man, as he says helped forced him to do what he did. My first thought was, well, could it be Ed? As it turned out, Mr. Marable identified David James Thompson as the man who killed Lucy. Of course, James Thompson had an alibi. He was at work. 4 other men corroborated his alibi. So, after one trip down that road with Mr. Marable, investigators decided that they probably just better shut up and let well enough alone about that. If they had dug a little deeper, they had realized that Herbert Thompson, David's brother, and the one who showed up at the Pollard farm to help on the day Lucy was killed, well, he didn't have an alibi. And he was in debt to Edward Pollard. And he also looked a whole lot like his brother David. Now, the Richmond Planet ran a fairly short statement on July 11th, 1896. It said Solomon Marable, the principal figure in the celebrated Lunenburg case, has yielded up his life in Farmville, Virginia on July 3rd, 1896. He declared with his dying breath that David James Thompson, depot agent and postmaster in Finneywood, Virginia, killed Mrs. Lucy Jane Pollard, and at that point of a revolver forced him to assist him. He was equally emphatic in saying that Mary Abernathy, Pokey Barnes, and Mary Barnes were all completely innocent. Folks, this was the first time that a Confederate ran an area of Virginia, and the government had blinked when facing a public backlash. I reckon they just might have realized that maybe the Civil War was truly over and freedom was on the march for all people, although it was nearly 70 years coming before it would be codified in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, despite the longest filibuster in history being held in the Senate. By the way, you can guess who held the filibuster. That's right, the Southern aristocrats representing the South. And it ended in their defeat on the Senate floor this time instead of the battlefield. Now, the old Pollard place still stands today. Some folks say that if you listen real close after the sun goes down, you can hear a woman cry out for help just outside the back door. Folks, I hope you got something out of our story today. If you did, please rate and review the podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble, maybe Spotify, throw us a like and don't forget to subscribe or follow wherever you're listening or watching. Now, come on over to Appalachian Murder Mystery or Legend podcast group on Facebook, where we talk Appalachian or just about anything else you want to talk about. I'll be back real soon with another Appalachian Murder Mystery or Legend, and I will see you then.